It has prompted a lot of debate, as we've just been having, actually, with the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police about women's safety on the streets and what could be done to keep them safe. Well, this weekend there's a plan for a Reclaim the Streets vigil to remember Sarah Everard is facing a court challenge on that. But also there have been some calls which have gone rather more extreme. Here is what Green Peer, Jenny Jones had to say in the House of Lords yesterday. Apologies, I'm just told that clip wasn't ready. Yes, here's what she had to say.
And in the week that the woman, Sarah Everard, was abducted and we suppose killed because remains have been found in a woodland in Kent, I would argue that at the next opportunity for any bill that's appropriate, I might actually put in an amendment to create a curfew for men on the streets after 6 p.m, which I feel would make women a lot safer, and discrimination of all kinds would be lessened.
That is what extraordinary words from the Green Peer Jenny Jones in the House of Lords. Yes, they're not on a TV station, but in the House of Lords. Well, let's talk to Natalie Collins about this and all of the issues surrounding the Everard case and women's safety. Gender justice specialist Natalie Collins. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Natalie, what do you make of what Jenny Jones had to say there?
Well, this isn't a new idea. Back in the kind of 60s and early 70s, Golda Meir in Israel, when there was a spate of crimes against women, argued the same thing, argued that actually if we're going to address this, let's have a curfew on men rather than telling women to remain in their home and not go out. I think I think it has merit. I don't think it's realistic that we do it, but I think
it has merit, you said.
Yeah, I think the whole point of this is to challenge this idea that it's up to women to keep themselves safe when it's men who are perpetrating these crimes. So I think the idea that we should challenge that women need to do stuff to keep themselves safe, when the reality is there's nothing that women can do to stop men abusing them. And that's the really scary, terrifying thing about living as a woman in the world.
No, okay. I'm living as a woman in the world, and I'm not terrified. Now maybe I'm living in a fantasy land, but I spent many years, waitressing till 2 a.m. in America and in the UK, and getting night buses and walking down the street. And I was always aware. I had to be aware of my safety. But you say there's nothing women can do. The reality is that women and girls and their parents live their lives constantly being aware of this. Now, I completely understand the argument. We shouldn't have to be aware of this. But for instance, I would not allow my 14-year-old to walk down a dark street at night on her own. I wouldn't want her, even with another girl. I wouldn't want her to be alone in any quiet street. I would certainly advise her in terms of her clothing when in the street, and her shoes, and whether she was able to run and things like that. I think people do take measures all the time. For instance, women don't walk through dark parks at night. Women will stick to bright roads even if it's a longer route. People do take action, and it's not just women. A lot of men as well will do the same to keep themselves safe. Now, realistically, you could have as much education, as many campaigns, and as many stickers and ribbons on Twitter that anyone wants. The reality is there will always be some bad people who will commit bad crimes. In which case, should we be tarring men with all the same brush?
Well, I think, the fact you just said there'll always be some bad people who do these things. The reality is that this is men doing these things. It's not people doing these things.
It's some men.
Well, it is some men, but it is men. And the fact is only some men have to do this for all women to change their behaviour. It's not the case that, why do we have to talk about not all men when the reality is it's yes, all women? You've just said, I'm not terrified, but I do all these things and make my daughter do all these things. We are so enculturated into being in a system where we are under threat all the time that we don't even think of ourselves as being terrified. We just think that's normal behaviour.
But is that really any different to I double lock my door when I leave my house and I make sure the windows are locked? Is that any different?
Because my body isn't a possession. My body is part of me. It's not, I can't do anything. The reality is that there's nothing that I can do to stop a man assaulting me.
Yes, there is.
There isn't. The reality is...
That's my point, is we do take measures to not put ourselves in more risk than, I would say, than necessary. And you're saying, okay, you're at risk at all times. I don't think... But the fact that we are so shocked by this crime, does that not tell us that actually women aren't at huge risk of such horrific crimes?
I don't think actually that the reaction to this is not just about this crime, as horrific as what has been done, and you know, we have to be absolutely horrified, and poor Sarah's family. You know, this is just a horrendous situation. But I think the thing that has come out of this has been that women are saying this is what I'm terrified of all the time. About 12% of men were murdering women in the last decade in the femicide census. 12% were committed by strangers. So I think the idea that this very rarely happens. It's 12%, and there's similarly with
12%, but we're still talking of very low numbers. I mean, that one is too many. I'm not pretending it isn't. Every single one of these isn't horrific for the person who dies and their family and loved ones. But we are not talking about the sort of something that's happening routinely, and we just it's just a news in brief on page 4 of the newspaper. It's on the front page for a reason. It's leading all the news for a reason. It's because it's a rare crime.
Yeah, but actually the killing of women is not rare, and the sexual harassment of women is not rare, and the sexual assault of women is not rare. And so those other crimes which are not rare, that, you know, rape rarely makes it onto the front page of the newspaper. When a partner rapes, it rarely even makes it anywhere. And actually only 1.7% of rapes they're reported end in conviction. So we have a real issue in this country.
But we know why they don't end in conviction, because largely they are cases where it's an awful phrase, date rape, and it's a he said, she said. They don't end in conviction because there's no evidence, unfortunately, other than a woman's testimony that a crime has taken place. And I'm sorry, that does not meet the evidentiary basis of beyond reasonable doubt.
I think, you know, if you spoke to many women who've reported rape, this is not where there's been a low threshold of evidence. This has often been, you know, we are seeing more and more rapes. I'm involved with the We Can't Consent to This campaign, and there are more and more rapes where women have been strangled and had very severe injuries. And when they go to the police say, well, you could have consented to this because of wider discourses on the idea that strangulation is a normal thing to do within sex. And so I think within our society, there are lots and lots of issues that women face in terms of accessing justice after they've been assaulted, after they've been harmed. And so the reality is, you know, you've already said that as a woman, and as the, you know, with your daughter, you already do lots of things to ensure that you remain safe. And you said, you know, I think most, you know, there's men who do that. There will be very few men who take the precautions women take. You know, there are, and
the precautions that women take routinely without even think. In fact, right. That was one of the things that I was thinking about yesterday. I would make those precautions and absolutely require that my daughter does, and I think of that as something that is routine. Is there anything that can be done though to change that? We have these awful things where, you know, students arriving at university are being given, you know, don't rape courses. I personally find that absolutely unacceptable, and if I was a young man, I would refuse to go on one of those courses, and I'd consider it's absolutely outrageous for us to be telling men that you're all a risk to women. But what can be done realistically to make the streets completely safe? Because you can have as much education, you can change laws, you can do whatever you want, there will still be some predatory sexual monsters out there, and that means, knowing they're out there, that all women will continue to take those precautions.
What I would say is we have to be really careful about talking about rapists as monsters. You know, the people, the men who rape, the men who abuse women are not monsters. They're our colleagues, they're our family members, they're potentially our sons. You know, we don't have this other category of human beings called, you know, monsters who do this stuff. The reality is that the men who do this stuff are the men who sit in the pub with their friends and make sexist jokes. They're the men who dismiss their wives' feelings in front of their family, or, you know, these are not kind of some other category of men. So that's the first thing we need to do, is recognize this is, you know, this is the reality, is that we don't know who is perpetrating this stuff, but we do know that 25% of women will be abused by a partner. We do know that 72% of girls will leave school having been emotionally abused by a boyfriend. We do know that like 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted in some way. This is not some, like, you know, kind of like very rare pariahs who do this. This is regular men. And so I think I do think we need to do stuff about teaching consent to everybody.
I think we need to teach about issues of consent to young women. Lots of the surveys about young women now seem to think that you know, it's acceptable for their boyfriend to slap them. I mean, good luck to any boy who slaps my daughter. I tell you what, I'll give him a 2-minute head start. But the streets won't be safe for him. I can tell you that right now. Natalie Collins, I would talk to you all day, but time is against us. I hope you will come back on the show again very, very soon. You've raised, I think, a lot of really, really interesting points, and you've given us a lot to think about.